The Ragnar Saga, Part 2. The King of the Northmen. When the screams at Lindisfarne had faded, the world had changed irreversibly. The Northmen were no longer a distant nuisance. They were a coming storm. And Ragnar Lothbrok was learning to command that storm. His victory and the treasures he brought back spread his name across Scandinavia like wildfire. Warriors flocked to his banner, eager for a share of the glory. But Ragnar would not be satisfied as a mere chieftain of raiders. He was determined to become a king of kings. And on this path, he would make choices that would alter not only the map of the world, but his own destiny. Chapter 2.1. A New Family. Dark Prophecies. His marriage to Lagertha, though born of legend, was not destined to last. Ragnar's growing ambition required stronger political alliances. He would find his destiny not in a shieldmaiden, but in a woman who was a legend herself, Aslog. She was a mysterious woman who called herself a crow. It was whispered that she was the secret daughter of Sigurd, the great dragon's lair, and Brynhildr, the Valkyrie. She carried the blood of heroes and gods in her veins. Ragnar was captivated by her sharp mind and prophetic wisdom as much as her beauty. This union would grant Ragnar's lineage its most famous warriors. From this marriage, his sons were born: Bjorn, Hvitserk, and Ubba. But the most peculiar birth was that of their son, Ivar Aslaug, with her gift of foresight, had warned Ragnar. Upon his return from a long journey, he was not to touch her for 3 nights, or their child would be born cursed. But Ragnar, overcome with passion and pride, ignored her warning. The result of their union was Ivar. A child born, it was said, with cartilage instead of bone in his legs, unable to walk. But this physical frailty concealed a brilliant and ruthless intellect, unlike any seen before. He would achieve with his mind what his father achieved with his sword. He would become Ivar the Boneless, the future dread of England. Chapter 2.2. The Rising Wave England Burns. After Lindisfarne, the Viking raids were no longer isolated events. For Ragnar and other chieftains, they became an annual enterprise. Every summer, the dragon-headed ships appeared on the coasts of England and Francia, and every year they struck deeper and more daringly. Ragnar had perfected his strategy. He no longer simply raided, he reigned through terror. He masterfully used psychological warfare to weaken his victims. He chose to attack on holy days like Easter, a deliberate act to shatter morale and prove that his god was stronger than theirs. His goal was to break the will of his enemy before the battle even began. The Vikings began to establish winter camps, or long forts, on enemy soil. This allowed them to bypass the long journey home and launch their attacks instantly with the coming of spring. England had become trapped in a relentless nightmare. Chapter 2.3. The Grand Prize, the Siege of Paris. As Ragnar's fame and power grew, so did his targets. He no longer had eyes for monasteries or small towns. He wanted the greatest prize in the world, the heart of the West Frankish kingdom, Paris. Paris was not just a wealthy city. It was a symbol of power and religion, ruled by Charles the Bald, grandson of Charlemagne. To conquer it would make Ragnar immortal. In the year 845, he assembled one of the largest Viking fleets ever seen. The sagas speak of 120 ships and over 5,000 warriors. The sight of this armada moving up the river Seine was like the apocalypse arriving by water. King Charles, to stop Ragnar, made a fatal error. He split his army on both banks of the river. Ragnar, a master strategist, ignored one half of the army and threw his full force at the other, annihilating it. Then, in an act of pure terror, he hung 111 Frankish prisoners in full view of the remaining army. This gruesome spectacle destroyed their will to fight. But Paris itself was an island fortress, difficult to assault directly. The siege dragged on, and disease the bloody flux tore through the Viking camp. Ragnar knew he could not take the city by force, but he no longer needed to. He had already besieged the king's will. With his army demoralized and his city starving, King Charles had no choice but to negotiate. Ragnar demanded an unthinkable price to leave: 7,000 French livres. That is nearly 2.5 tons of pure silver and gold. This was the most famous example of the Danegeld, a tactic of extortion the Vikings would master. Ragnar had not conquered Paris. He had held an empire for ransom. Ragnar Lothbrok now stood at the pinnacle of his power. He was not just a Viking chieftain, was the most feared man in Europe. A king of the sea, a master of terror, a legend in his own lifetime. But the wheel of fate is always turning. And the same pride that builds empires is often the pride that brings them to ruin. Next, in part 3, the final voyage, an old enemy, and the infamous snake pit that would seal his legend forever.